This is Comic Geek Speak, episode 1709, Top 5 Iconic Moments in Comics.
Laser beams, opinions like the seasons on everything you read in comics, movies, games, toys, artists, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek. Uniting the world's mightiest heroes, this is...
I'm Chris Everly.
I'm Adam Murdo.
And I'm Ian Levenstein.
Comic Geek Speak!
Welcome one and all to our latest episode. We apologize for the delay. Again, the logistics of summer are challenging. We're able to gather three of us here off-site. This is a remote studio recording. We couldn't converge on our fabled studio. But our invaluable pinch hitter, especially for top fives, Ian Levenstein, has joined us. He's giving us invaluable technical expertise here and input. Ian, thanks so much. How you doing?
Doing good, Chris. Doing good. Good to be back for another top five.
Outstanding. After we discuss our sponsor, we'll give a layout on how this top five is going to run, and then we'll let the fun begin.
This episode of Comic Geek Speak is brought to you by the Collection Drawer Company, manufacturer of the Drawer Box Storage System, the easy access storage solution. Patent pending. And the problem that this easy access storage solution is meant to solve is the problem of trying to get at comic books in that pesky bottommost long box at the bottom of a tall stack of such long boxes. How the heck are you supposed to get to those comics without lifting all those other long boxes off of the bottom one and then lifting the lid off the top? Very simple solution. You just contact Collection Drawer Company at collectiondrawer.com and order a bunch of drawer boxes, because then once you've moved all your comics into them, you'll be able to access those comics by pulling out a cardboard drawer from the front rather than lifting off the lid from the top. So you can stack those boxes as high as you want and never have to worry about lifting them off one another again, because they can be accessed just that easily. And so accommodating are the folks at the Collection Drawer Company. They also make these boxes in a variety of different sizes and shapes, so you can use them to store things that are of other dimensions than comic books, such as magazines, action figures, LPs, and so on. And they also offer accessories to accentuate and enhance your storage experience, such as the Box Locks box anchoring system, which helps to stabilize your drawer boxes, prevents box tipping, and it allows you to stack them even higher, and the Box Sort upright dividers, which help you to create divisions between the comics within your drawer boxes and prevent them from falling about all over each other as you pull the drawers in and out. It prevents spine cracking and other damage, and it also helps you to create handy divisions and organize your collection within your drawer boxes. And if you have a very large collection and have a large number of traditional long boxes to replace with drawer boxes, the Collection Drawer Company does offer volume discounts. So go to see them at collectiondrawer.com and see if you can arrange a deal of some kind with them. And don't forget, over the last year or two, they have experimented with their original drawer box design, added an extra layer of cardboard for a triple strength outer shell. So they're even stronger and more stable than ever. So once again, that is the collectiondrawer.com, home of the Collection Drawer Company, maker of the drawer box. Seek them out today and find out what they can do to help you make your collection that much more organized and accessible today.
Mert, I'd like to think in an alternate historical reality, you are a masterful 1950s master of ceremonies at a roast or a game show. Man.
I feel like I'm wearing a shoulder-padded suit standing behind a large freestanding microphone right now.
Yeah, you've been a great radio voice actor, man. Woo! Imagine Mert as the Shadow. Come on, Lamont Cranston.
I imagine you would be a pretty good Jimmy Olsen in a Superman short.
I think Ian hits closer to home, Chris. If Orson Welles were still with us, he would not be losing any sleep over competition from me.
I don't know, Mert. Jim Olsen is definitely a great pick, but you might be underestimating yourself a little bit. Outstanding, my friend. Now, we've all used – have you ever used drawer boxes?
I've experimented with them at shows, but I never actually upgraded. And now that I'm looking to get rid of most of my physical comics, I don't necessarily have a use for them at this moment. Sure. But I kind of wish that I did have them when I did own a lot of comics, because it is a ginormous pain in the butt to lift 4 boxes off just to get to the one on the bottom.
Amen. And like you, I mean, a lot of the people we know are sort of downgrading in terms of the amount of comics they retain and for size or interest or whatever the reasons might be. But if you're still one of those tried and true collectors who likes to hold on to all their floppies, like Ian said, do yourself and your back a favor. Drawer box is just outstanding. And when I still had my shop, whenever a collection came in and it was in drawer boxes, I was just thrilled because I would get my hands on them. It was wonderful for storage.
A lot less heavy lifting.
Indeed. All right, gentlemen. This is the top five I've long looked forward to. We were talking about ideas for top fives, and this is one I came up with. Shane also came up with a great topic that I won't spoil. I think that's one we'll get to down the road as well. So we're talking about iconic moments, and just so the audience understands, this is not a stickler topic in the sense that it has to be a panel or a page or even what your definition of an iconic moment is. I'm leaving that to my august friends and colleagues to decide. For me, it's moments in comic book history, my reading history, that struck me so emotionally that either gave me chills or even brought tears to my eyes. Or every time I read that moment, whether I'm 12 years old or now I'm 45, it still has that indelible impact. So that's how I approached my list. Ian, how did you approach your list? What was the criteria for an iconic moment, essentially?
For me, it's pretty similar. I'd say mainly it's moments that continue to fill me with joy to this day. Ones that I may regularly think back to even when reading that particular character or that particular comic in today. It doesn't even have to be that particular moment that I'm rereading, but it may just pop back into my head like, oh yeah, hey, remember when that happened? And it just, it's one that my brain continually reboots back to when reading a comic.
And Mert, how about you, brother?
Pretty much the same criteria you guys are working from, it sounds like. I kind of threw historical import to the wind, because otherwise we'll just have the same list of Peter Parker bit by a radioactive spider, or bat flying through Bruce Wayne's window, etc. There are just scores and scores of possibilities if we were trying to be more objective and historically grounded with this. But yeah, like you guys, I think I'm just going for things that have been personally impactful for me. Just a sort of flashbulb memories for me as a comic book reader, things that have stuck with me, and as Ian said, either inspire joy or conversely inspire intense fear or dread in me. Anything that provoked a strong emotional response and sort of engraved itself indelibly upon my fanish imagination. These are what qualify an image for iconism in my book.
Splendid. And I should point out that we're going to have alternates. We're at the end, we're going to do the way we normally do these top five. So each of us will give, for example, our fifth selection, and then we'll go around each one and we'll elaborate on our selection in more detail. And of course, the other people involved can also pipe in if they want to comment on what we've selected as well. Like Murd said, some of these are going to be very personal. I found for me, some of them are moments that are enormously famous, that they're well known, but they also really affected me. Others, maybe not so much. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I really can't wait to hear what you guys have selected, because I, of course, deeply respect both your taste and your opinions when it comes to an issue like this. So, actually, I respect your taste and opinion on all issues, frankly, but we're talking comics. So that's where we're going to go with this. Any other comments, guys, before we jump into our list?
Well, just a standard disclaimer for these top five episodes. Not only in our definition of iconic moment, but in what we choose to put on our lists to fit that definition. I mean, it's all 100% arbitrary, deeply subjective, and also very variable. If we try to do this same exercise again a week or a month from now, we might come up with a completely different list. So please don't try to hold us to this in the future. This is just what we were able to come up with in the time frame provided. And just go with it, just have as much fun with it as we have. And when all's said and done, you'll get a chance to present us with your own highly subjective lists on our forums.
Murd, outstanding. I should have mentioned the disclaimer. Well done, brother. Well done. And again, also, this is our selections cover, hither and yon when it comes to the comic book medium. So anything's going to go here in terms of what we select. It's not going to be all Marvel or all DC or anything else. So again, I look forward to it. Ian, you're our guest host. Why don't we start with you? What's your fifth selection?
I think my fifth selection is going to be We Are the Walking Dead from Walking Dead issue number 24.
Merger number 5.
Your moment of miracle, man. Damn you, Liz, you're laughing at my life.
Superb. All right, my number 5, and this is not going to be a surprise to people, is from the Christopher Priest run of Black Panther issue 27, page 17. I don't know everything, Aurora. I'm afraid. All right. Ian, why don't you elaborate? Why was that your fifth selection?
I mean, I've been a huge fan of the Walking Dead comic book for years now. Funny enough, I actually first picked up the comic when you fine folks on CGS wound up doing a Book of the Month club for Walking Dead's Volume 1 and 2, if I remember correctly, back when I was still in college. I've been feeling old lately, especially since it's been 10 years since Super Show to 2008, as Facebook decided to tell me as we're recording this today, and I'm looking back on that, and I'm like, okay, time has flown. But I remember picking it up and initially not really enjoying it. I felt like it wasn't really for me, and I actually initially felt that with a lot of comics when I first read them back in college. Maybe I just wasn't ready for it, or I wasn't initiated enough with non-superhero comics to really get into different genres at the time. And I don't know if black and whites were quite what I was looking for outside of manga back then. And the story didn't quite grasp me, and it just wasn't really working for me. But then I went back and I reread it a couple years later, and I absolutely loved it. And in particular, it's this issue number 24 here, where Rick is coming back from being in a coma for a while. This is during the main prison arc, and he winds up going into the yard, and everyone's sort of questioning his leadership skills at this point because, you know, is he going crazy? Has he been crazy this entire time? Do they need different leadership, or is he just a genius? And it was this particular moment that really cemented to me that he was the leadership that they needed. The moment that he screams, "We are the Walking Dead," that cemented to me that Rick was the leader for those that were still alive, because it proved that essentially they were the monsters, which is the case with a lot of zombie books and movies, that it takes them to realize that they are the minority and not the majority for things to really start getting going again. And that did it for me with The Walking Dead, and that really cemented in my head that this was something special and was going to continue to be something special for me.
Ian, do you still read The Walking Dead monthly?
I never really did. I was always more of a trade reader, and I'm currently in the middle of the Whisperers arc, so I am still reading it. It's just more like when I get to it type of thing. But I am still enjoying it. It's certainly changed a lot over the years. And
what number of issues is the Whisper arc roughly?
That's a good question. We're definitely past 150 now.
Okay. No, the only reason I asked because I had to jump the shark moment with The Walking Dead because I read it from the beginning.
Yeah.
And not only after issue 100, I thought there was an eye-rolling moment. I just dropped the book.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've talked about this before. I don't know if I want to talk about it now because I don't want to spoil it for people who maybe haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
You probably know what I'm talking about. It has to do with a certain bat, and then how they later react to the person who's wielding that bat.
Yeah.
I just thought it was very poor storytelling.
You're not the only one who dropped it at that particular moment, so I can understand why that didn't work for you.
Yeah.
For me, I wanted to see where they were going to go next, and I think that it's not much of a spoiler to say that there is a bit of a time jump at the end of their war, and I feel like that did reset things enough for me and intrigue me enough to continue with the book. So where we are now is enough of a difference to keep me rolling, but there are still some eye roll moments from here and there, and I'm kind of wondering just how much more gases in the tank for The Walking Dead.
Well, that was my last question. Do you think the book has they have an ending in mind for that book?
I think they have an ending in mind for the book that's going to be significantly different than the ending of the television show, especially with news that I know that's been coming down of late, as to casting decisions and casts coming and going. So I dropped the TV show about halfway through the Negan arc, because what you're talking about it not working for you anymore, that was kind of me in the TV show.
Okay.
I may pick it up eventually, but for me, for now, the comic's still doing it, and it was moments like this in issue 24 that just cemented to me that this would be something that was the characters made enough sense for me and felt real enough to keep me going, and that's what you need in a zombie comic. You know, you need something that at least connects you to the main characters, because other than the main characters, what do you have? You have a whole bunch of people screaming brains, and, you know, that's great for a couple issues, but,
right.
You know, what are you going to do after that?
Fair enough. All right, Murd, your fifth selection, please.
All right. So this comes to us from the first deconstructionist take on superheroes that I ever read, when I discovered one of those formerly very pricey and rare collected editions, like trades, of the Eclipse Comics editions of Alan Moore's Miracle Man. And I realized the character was originally called Marvel Man when printed in the United Kingdom, and so I apologize to any of our UK listeners out there or otherwise historical sticklers, but, you know, I first encountered the character under the name Miracle Man, and I find it very difficult to think of him as anything else now, so I'm just going to keep on saying that throughout this, what follows. But I found one of those trades of, like, the first, 4 or 5 issues of the first several stories that appeared in Warrior magazine in the UK at like a consignment shop when I was a young teenager, and it did blow my little mind. It's a story of down on his luck reporter Michael Moran, who happens to be lounging around in the offices of the British equivalent of the Department of Energy one day, and he notices a word, atomic, printed in reverse letters from the backside of a glass partition, and he just absent-mindedly mutters to himself the long-forgotten anonym Kimota, which was the magic word that transformed little Mickey Moran into Miracle Man in those flagrant Captain Marvel ripoff comics of yesteryear back in the 50s. And suddenly, the adult Michael Moran is transformed into Miracle Man, blonde spit girl, Tinkerbell effect and all. He has fantastic powers. He flies around, not quite knowing what's happening, but slowly regaining what he thinks are his memories of being Miracle Man in days of yore. He foils some terrorists or something and then flies off home to tell his wife this miraculous thing that's happened to him. But as he sits there talking to his wife, Liz, relating to her these things that, again, he thinks he recalls of his time as Miracle Man back in the 50s, which we later learn are just implanted false memories based on old black and white comic books. His wife points out to him the numerous inconsistencies and outright absurdities of what he's telling her, just basically laughing in his face as they're pointing out to him, if there'd been such a thing as Miracle Man in the 50s, don't you think I would have heard of him? And at one point she actually starts cracking jokes at what Mike is telling her, and he crashes his hand down into the hardwood floor that they're sitting on and shouts out, "Damn you, Liz, you're laughing at my life!" And it's at that moment that the reader is kind of jerked back into the frame of reality that Alan Moore is creating for us in this story, where we're being there's sort of a cognitive dissonance at work here between these old 50 stories, which a lot of British readers of the 1980s would have remembered, and the more realistic frame of mind that Alan Moore is planting the adult Michael Moran into, and the ultimate effect is what I would characterize, speaking from my own reading experience, as a kind of meta-empathy, like a sympathy for the silly, you might say, for the experience of fictional characters whose very lives and experiences are nothing more than a joke to us, the over people reading their adventures. It was pretty effective, though, in sort of suspending me midway between the ridiculousness of these old adventures and the obviously much more somber and realistic frame of reference. It showed me that this story was something a bit different from the comic book that I had read up to that time. It's something that sort of drifted back into my mind in future years whenever I encountered someone who was a bit derisive of comic books and the people who read them. And you is laughing at my life when you laugh at mine.
Murd, outstanding. You brought me back because I remember I was about 12. I think I was in 6th grade or so, 12 or 13. And a neighborhood chum, I was over his house. And he, like a lot of kids, he had comics around at that time. It's the 1980s. And he had these, I think they were hardcover collections of Miracle Man. And I'd never read Alan Moore comics up to this point. And he just let me read through them. And, I was 12, 13, but I was blown away. Even though I didn't have the full awareness you had to appreciate, like, for example, what you just pointed out so magnificently, I realized I was reading something that was very different and far more sophisticated than the standard sort of great, but, still sort of run-of-the-mill superhero fare I was reading at that time. And for me, that was a moment where comics were never the same again in a great way. Because even I was very young, I was starting to grasp, even if it was a very primitive way, that, wow, the comic books can be so much more. I remember there was a key moment, I remember which story it was, where he's wiping out, I think he's in South America, wiping out like this nest of like refugee Nazis. And the one Nazi, like these are all like former SS guys, he falls to his knees and he goes, "You were what we were told about. You're the Superman, essentially." And then the Miracle Man just kills him. And I was like, whoa, because I studied World War II even then, and I was just floored by what I was reading. And Murd, I want to thank you for that, because that brought me back to a wonderful moment in my comic book reading life, essentially. Ian, any thoughts on Miracle Man?
It continues to be another hole in my reading. I'm afraid I've yet to tackle Miracle Man formally, but I got to do it eventually. I know that it's one of those tentpole reading experiences that everyone goes back to, whether it be the Alan Moore stuff or whether it be the later Neil Gaiman stuff, which hopefully we will eventually get a conclusion to. I haven't gotten to it yet. I think they're in Marvel Unlimited right now for me to read, so I may very well wind up having to do that next. But it's another one of those classics that I've yet to get around to, and I'm sort of ashamed of at this point, because really get off your butt and read the classics, Levenstein.
Brother, I would only say we all feel that shame in different ways for different titles, so you're not alone, and that's part of the fun.
Yep.
So
yes, indeed.
You'll get there.
It may not make quite as big an impression on you as it did on Chris and me when we read it as 12 or 13-year-olds, but
sure.
It's still a heck of a good read. It's worth your time.
Oh, definitely.
Well said, Murd. Well said. All right, my number 5, again, I've talked about this series ad infinitum or ad nauseum, depending on your perspective on the show. This is my beloved Christopher Priest Black Panther series. Began with the Marvel Knights imprint and then continued under the regular Marvel imprint in the late 90s into the early 2000s. If you're a fan of the Black Panther folks, it doesn't the film, I should say, it doesn't exist without this series, this specific series, that and what Don McGregor did in the 1970s in Jungle Action. I believe, Murd, you were just reading this arc, the what I consider classic Storm and Drang storyline.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I'm right in the middle of it right now.
Yep, so I won't spoil too much, but again, basically the gist of the storyline is that T'Challa is trying to navigate a foreign policy that involves him possibly getting involved in a war with Atlantis, Latveria, and the Deviants. And the whole gist of Priest's approach to the book was to emphasize that T'Challa is a king, not really a superhero, and that he has to make decisions that are very difficult, that may seem, indecipherable or even callous to some of his superhero colleagues, but he has to think first and foremost of his people. And this is a key moment where he's really struggling when it comes to whether or not he's taking the right course in this incredibly complicated and very dangerous international game of diplomacy that he's playing here. And Aurora Storm, because it was established, I want to say a Marvel team-up, Murd, by Claremont.
It was definitely Claremont. I don't clearly remember which title it was in, but yeah.
Yeah, because I know you taught me that. So they were childhood friends, and there was definitely a strong affection there. And now she's returned as an adult, as one of the X-Men. It's this for me. This iconic moment is just a page. I don't get as much original art anymore just because of cost. But if I ever find this page, it's my holy grail. It's page 17 of issue 27, and most of it's no dialogue. It's just the two of them embracing because she's about to leave to return to the X-Men, and they share in a passionate kiss. And T'Challa's old love, Monica Lynn, who he's been involved with since the Silver Age, she is there as well. She's a tragic character, and she's kind of off to the side watching them, and then T'Challa lets sort of his mask of the king fall away and becomes a normal man. He tells Oro quietly that, I'm afraid, like, of what he's dealing with. And Monica's crushed because you can just tell from the way it's drawn by Sal Valuto and Bob Amon. The art is breathtaking. Just the sequence, the storytelling here, that she's crushed because you can tell by her face that he never confided like that in her, basically. And to me, this page is just a master class in what sequential art can do when it comes to just being so evocative and powerful, essentially. So that's my number 5. Any comments there, gentlemen?
Having read it just recently, Chris, I can agree. It is a moment of tremendous power and emotional vulnerability on the part of T'Challa. It's a great construction of the idea that heavy hangs the head that wears the crown. And yes, it's just fraught with both emotional tension and also historical resonance, because as we pointed out here, the T'Challa has a history as established by Storm's creator, Chris Claremont. I'm sorry, he did not create Storm, I apologize, but he did do more to develop her than just about any other way.
Yeah.
So, there is that. So he established that there was this bond, stemming back to childhood between these two. That if the king can open up to her in a way that he can't to anyone else, and then throwing in the presence of Monica Lynn for that extra, classic soap opera love triangle element, it is, as you say, Chris, it is a very well constructed page, approached from multiple angles.
There's many reasons why. And I've said this before on other episodes that I've guested on with you guys. There's many reasons why Christopher Priest's run of Black Panther stands up. And character building is most definitely one of them, and this is a perfect display of that.
Amen. In a profoundly fanboyish secular sense. Huzzah! Hallelujah. Let's go to our number 4. Bird, what's your number 4?
Okay, yes. My number 4, a little bit of classic Legion of Superheroes for you. The Sacrifice of Pharaoh Lad.
My number 4, and I'm gonna really go to the classic well here, is from The Dark Knight Returns. It's when Superman is rejuvenated by the sun after just taking out a Soviet nuclear missile.
My number 4 is from Web of Spider-Man number 32. And all I'll say is, 2 weeks in the ground, in the grave, dead, 2 weeks!
Ian, I'm so glad you're here. All right, Murray, fire away.
Okay, just to introduce a little bit of silver into these proceedings, I went a little bit further back in time for this one. The moment in question happens in Adventure Comics number 353. This is a part of that classic run of Legion stories written by a very young Jim Shooter, who would later go on to impact the world of superhero comics in a variety of other ways, both positively and negatively. But in those days, he was just a young teenager who happened to get himself a gig writing comics about teenage superheroes for DC Comics under legendary and notorious editor Mort Weisinger. He introduced the character Pharaoh Lad shortly before Adventure number 353. He made only maybe 6 appearances as a Legionnaire. His power was basically the ability to transform his body into organic iron, kind of like what of the X-Men was able to do about a decade or so later. But he used this power as a Legionnaire, and there was one classic. It was more than one part, which did not happen very often in the Silver Age of comics, was not unheard of, but somewhat rare, in which the Legion was faced with a threat that they couldn't handle on their own. A gaseous entity called the Sun Eater, basically a huge pink cloud of living cosmic gas that just seeped through the known galaxies, enveloping and consuming stars for sustenance. It was on its way to consume Earth's sun. The Legion could not repel it on their own, so they were actually reduced to enlisting the aid of a group of vicious supervillains called the Fatal Five to help them. But even with their help, that wasn't enough. They managed to put their hands on a super weapon called an absorbatron bomb, which, if detonated at the heart of the Sun Eater, would destroy it. The catch was it needed to be carried in and detonated by hand, and so whichever Legionnaire did this deed would probably not survive. So then Superboy, who was at that time still very much a member of the Legion and a part of their everyday activities, and the most powerful among them, volunteered to be the one to make that sacrifice. But then little old Pharaoh lad, the new kid on the block, who did not have very high self-esteem or a sense of self-worth, he actually had kind of he was disfigured. He wore a full-face mask all the time to conceal his grotesque birth defects. Which are whatever mutation gave him his ferric powers also made him hideous of face. He had certain self-esteem issues, but he decided he needed to prove himself and prevent Superboy from making the ultimate sacrifice when Pharaoh, who in his own eyes was worth much less than Superboy, could do it for him. So he actually sucker-punched Superboy, grabbed the absorbatron bomb from him, and flew with it into the heart of the Sun Eater to set it off, thus destroying the Sun Eater and himself and saving Earth's solar system and countless others from perdition. And I haven't read this story myself, but I am at least familiar with this iconic image from historical retrospectives of the Legion, and also from Pharaoh Lad's Who's Who entry. And it just strikes me that this is the kind of story that was not very often done in the Silver Age. And Jim Shooter, being too young to know better, you might say, was able to step outside of the generic conventions and actually do stories of heroic sacrifice like this. It's not the only time in the course of Jim Shooter's Legion run back in the Silver Age that he had something like this happen to the characters with which he was working. But it's one that's very fondly remembered by Legion fans even to this day. It's had shockwaves throughout the decades. And eventually Pharaoh Lad, he came back in various forms. We proved to have an identical twin brother, and who showed up and was a part of a few Legion adventures. And also, when the Legion was rebooted a couple of times after 0 Hour, Pharaoh Lad, as a fan favorite, having sacrificed himself so tragically young, was able to return to continuity and have further adventures that way. But yeah, that sacrifice back in the Silver Age, those days of innocence when such things rarely happened to superheroes, really hit a chord with a lot of Legion fans. And even I, having not read the story, have always carried it in my mind as kind of an interesting sort of textual anomaly of those days, for which Jim Shooter, I think, is to be congratulated.
Now, Murray, Shooter was a teenager when he wrote those, correct?
He was. He was 13 when he turned in his first script.
Wow. Looking back at it historically, is it surprising that DC allowed a character like that to die, or they just think the Legion wasn't important enough they didn't mind? Like, what's your take on that?
More the latter. I mean, these were characters that weren't part of the mainstream DC universe. They were all the way up in the future. And the one that Shooter chose to kill off was one that he had created himself anyway, and just a few issues ago, so hadn't been around long enough for too many fans to have formed attachments at that point. So Weisinger probably thought, what the heck, no great loss.
Mort Weisinger, always known for being lovable and cuddly.
I do find it fascinating, Murr, just how much time has changed, because, if that exact same thing would have happened today, we would be thinking, oh, don't worry about it, he'll be back in 3 issues. And
right.
And that's not the case back then. Death actually meant something. It wasn't just like you could say to yourself, well, the only person who's going to stay dead is Uncle Ben, and everybody else could easily come back to life. A lot has changed in the world of mainstream comic books since the Silver Age, and that's why Pharaoh Lad meant as much as it did.
All right, Mert, thank you, because I know very little about the Legion. It's an area of comic book reading that I'm criminally ignorant of. I just know the very basic premise, and that's it. So that's a story I have to read, because I know it's an important story. I've certainly heard of it, and I appreciate you elaborating on it, because I've never read any much Legion at all. So. Ian, you were talking about, feeling like you really omitted when it came to Miracle Man. This is a shameful omission on my part. So.
Yes, indeed.
All right. Now, my number 4, I should preface that Frank Miller's all over my list. Growing up, his work was one that always spoke to me very powerfully. And a lot of these stories still do, regardless of what people may think of Miller's work now or his politics or whatever else. I'm going back to the stories that I was exposed to in my teens, that when I read them now as a middle-aged man, most of them still hold up very well. And, when I think about The Dark Knight Returns, the original volume, there's so many moments in this book, and let's say I read this maybe once a year, that still have this incredible emotional wallop for me and give me chills or my eyes moisten. And we've talked on the show many times. I know Brian Deemer's mentioned this, of how a lot of people may find Superman a little dull, the big blue Boy Scout. I've never felt that way, but I know other people do, and I can understand why. And I think the best Superman stories go right to the heart of the concept of Superman as basically as myth, as a mythical figure, godlike with a small g figure, and all that entails. I think of All-Star Superman. I think of What Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. Other small, shorter arcs, one-shot stories. But when I think of the power of the character and how it speaks to me as a reader, and let's face it, as someone who's just invested in popular culture, the moment in Dark Knight Returns, if you're looking at there's so many different trades now. The one I have, it's on page 176 to page 179. And that is in the I believe that it's the final installment of the series. Yes. So Superman, not to spoil too much, I'm not sure most people have read it, but if you haven't, there's an incident where international relations break down. This is the 1980s. The Cold War still raging, and the Soviets launch a nuclear missile at a sort of like third world banana republic nation where the United States has stationed troops in a Cold War proxy conflict. And Superman races there to intervene, and he stops the missile, but he's in the heart of the explosion. And Miller, this is when Miller's at the peak of his artistic powers, and he's a much younger man. And, of course, great inking by Klaus Janson, coloring by Lynn Varley. And he shows the impact of Superman stopping this missile, what it does to him. It's not like he's like, I'm fine, arms akimbo. Like, he's basically reduced almost to like a cadaverous form, virtually disintegrating, essentially. And to me, just the dramatic, cinematic, sequential storytelling here. I'm not going to read through every blurb because the narrator, the omniscient narrator, is telling you what's happening. Actually, I take that back. It's Superman in his own words who's telling you about his experience. But Miller shows you Superman, in the maelstrom of the atomic fire and like lightning shooting through him, and he's fading away essentially physically, and he falls to earth. And just in the narrative, he's basically imploring that Mother Earth and the sun acknowledge the fact that he's always been like their champion, their protector, and please restore me and I'll honor you. And even as I look at it now, to me, it just captures the essence of what Superman actually is and what his link is to the planet Earth, and how that the Earth and our sun give him his singular powers. And it's just a moment. There are moments in reading superhero comics where they transcend the genre for me and they become myth. And this is one of those moments for me.
It's funny that Frank Miller has been quoted at times to saying that he's not a big fan of Superman. And it's fascinating to me in that aspect that one of the most iconic images of Superman comes from Frank Miller. Because I firmly 100% agree with you on that, Chris, that particular moment there, you get the essence of Clark right there in one panel. You get a man who literally gets his power from the Earth, while at the same time is connected to it, because even though he is an alien from another planet, he is from Earth. And that's what's so important about Superman himself, is that he draws his strength both literally and figuratively from the world. And that particular panel, that particular moment, grasps that beautifully. I may not exactly be looking forward to Frank Miller's upcoming run on Superman as part of the DC Black line, but I hope he grasps that in that series to come, because it's moments like this that he really captures the character.
Murd, what do you think?
Well, Ian is certainly correct that Frank Miller has voiced certain distaste for the Superman character at times. Just witness what he did with him in the couple of sequels that he's produced to The Dark Knight Returns. But yeah, I also agree with what the two of you have said about how he's sort of done right by the character in this particular story. There was that I remember one other full-page iconic splash from The Dark Knight Returns that involves Superman, as Clark Kent is, standing there in what I remember is kind of an open-fronted, baggy silk shirt. He almost looks like a model on the cover of a romance novel.
Yep.
I think President Reagan is nearby. They're in conference, and he's just standing there on a grassy hillock amid nature, like grinning, the sun shining on his face as a butterfly flits past. Yeah, so Miller is not exactly complimentary to the Man of Steel in that story, but he's kind of presented as this naive, corn-fed puppet of the executive branch and the governmental establishment of the United States. And that image of Superman's phoenix-like resurrection, invoking the animistic spirits of Earth and Sun to restore him. I'm not sure that really fits with my understanding of Superman's belief system, but it's still a very nice, powerful image. And, anything Frank Miller does to treat Superman even slightly positively is to be encouraged in my mind. And I agree, I'm not really looking forward to him doing a Superman project, even if it is he's black.
Well, it would also make a very good Captain Planet moment. Earth, wind, water, fire, heart, boom, right there. Captain Planet.
All right, Ian, your selection, my friend.
All right, so I went with a moment from Web of Spider-Man, Volume 1, Issue 32, part of, in my honest opinion, probably one of the top 5, if not the top 3 Spider-Man stories of all time, Kraven's Last Hunt. It is so good, and I agree with this myself, that usually I like a Spider-Man story to be light in tone, just because Spider-Man himself is light in tone, and when they try to go dark, they often miss the heart of the character. This was not one of those instances. This is during the black costume era, but I believe this was also post symbiote, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Yes. So he was still wearing a version of the black costume, just not the Venom symbiote itself. And in this storyline, Kraven quite literally buries Spider-Man and steals his life to try to ruin the character of Spider-Man in the press and with his loved ones, and essentially just destroy Spider-Man. And in this issue here, we see what's happening to Peter while he has quite literally been buried. After being in a fetal position in this white room of his own making, winds up seeing a whole bunch of loved ones, and totally embraces the spider animal capacity of himself, and just makes his way out of the grave finally. And it's an iconic cover to the issue, but then there's just the moment itself inside of the issue itself, where he finally makes it out, and you see he's exhausted. He's completely, he doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know what's happened. All he knows is that he's finally free. And then he makes his way to Kraven's mansion and realizes what Kraven has been doing to his image and to his life while he has been gone. And that's where that famous line that I read at the beginning here comes out as completely exacerbated. Peter Parker screams 2 weeks in the ground, in the grave, dead. 2 weeks. He lost 2 weeks of his life that he's never going to get back. And the only thing on his mind right now is A, where's Mary Jane? And B, I need to get Kraven, and I need to end this. By the time this issue is done with, he does make it to Mary Jane's apartment, basically winds up making known to him that he is still alive and that there is a way out of this. And then he goes off to look for Kraven, and it's not the conclusion to the arc, but it very much is the emotional crust of the Kraven's Last Hunt storyline, and it's just so remarkably done. I love it so much.
Ian, that's a great selection. I mean, I remember when that came out. I think it was right after the quote. It really wasn't the quote, "The Death of the Hobgoblin," and I was so fully invested in the Spider-Man books at that time, and that's J.M. DeMatteis wrote that, correct?
Yes.
Okay, of course. So that's one of those stories that it so felt and still feels like it mattered.
Yeah.
That there was real weight to it. Like you really felt, and you just captured that so beautifully. Just the sheer impact on the character of Spider-Man, what that did to him. And wasn't there a scene in the overall story where Kraven in the Spider-Man costume actually confronts Mary Jane?
Yes.
And she doesn't realize who it actually is, and she's traumatized by the way he's acting.
Yep.
It's you don't get many stories like that today, folks. When it comes to superhero comics, and that's just J.M. DeMatteis' meat. I mean, very few people do sort of like the psycho thriller the way he does. Great selection, and that's a masterpiece without question.
Yeah, and Mike Zeck's art too is just so beautiful in this entire situation here. So yeah, I freaking love it, and I'm glad to have it on my shelf.
Were any thoughts on that story?
I'll just amen to what Ian said about how Spider-Man done dark usually is Spider-Man done poorly, but this is a very strong signal exception to that rule. Yes, I have read the story. I remember the thing that stands out most to me is Kraven basically bathing himself in a pit of spiders and consuming them, sort of totemistically to gain the attributes of his foe. Yeah, and of course the infamous denouement of the story, which is Kraven committing suicide. So all very powerful stuff. And J.M. DeMatteis says, as you said, Chris, very few people do psychodrama in superheroes the way J.M. DeMatteis does. And he's great at getting into the minds of supervillains in particular. This is no one would ever look at this particular member of Spidey's rogues gallery the same way again.
And to piggyback on your point, Merd, go back also to some years after this, when DeMatteis was writing Spectacular Spider-Man with art by Sal Buscema, and he really explores the impact of the Osborn legacy on Harry Osborn, which culminates in the classic issue 200, where Harry, quote, dies. And the final pages where he's killed are so moving. Beautiful art by Sal Buscema. But again, and Ian, doesn't DeMatteis do a lot with the Vermin character too?
Yes. Not
just in Kraven's Last Hunt, but also in the later Spectacular Spider-Man run also. And the sort of the mental vicissitudes that character is dealing with. So these are great stories, folks. And they're not expensive. So like Kraven's Last Hunt is in trade. And the Harry Osborn stuff, you can probably find a lot of that in bargain bins. All, for me, essential Spider-Man reading.
I think if memory serves, I may have very well picked up my trade of Kraven's Last Hunt for $5 at the first New York Comic Con. If not, it was the second. I just remember that it was that quote unquote prestige edition version of the Kraven's Last Hunt with the black cover and the sort of bluish black Spider-Man on the main spine and cover. But yeah, very, very easy to find if you know where to find it, and obviously it's on Marvel Unlimited as well.
Thanks for reminding us that with Marvel Unlimited, you can read their entire libraries on there. So you can also grab those issues there if you don't want to actually own physical floppies. Murd, quick continuity question, though that's increasingly irrelevant these days. But didn't Kraven's son take up the mantle for quite a while after his suicide?
A couple of different sons of his, actually.
Okay.
One of them became a character called the Grim Hunter, who made it his pastime to hunt other Spider-Man villains for sport. He died fairly soon, and then another one of Kraven's sons, Alyosha Kraven, became the new Kraven the Hunter after that. Yeah, Kraven had quite a few legitimate children.
And wasn't one of the sons also a film star?
Oh, right. During the I think that was written by Ron Zimmerman or somebody. That was Alyosha, who was, I believe, created by J.M. DeMatteis on one of his runs on Spectacular Spider-Man, but then taken in a very different direction by Zimmerman.
And Kraven's since been resurrected, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was actually a very well done storyline by Dan Slott during his very long and very well received Spider-Man run, which recently concluded. And you're talking about the Osborns earlier. I know that I'm looking forward to finishing the run, just because I know that it ends on a very Osborn heavy note, from what I'm hearing.
I've read part of issue 800, Ian. I have to finish it, then I have 801 after that.
Yeah.
And yes, it deals heavily with the Osborns.
Yep.
All right, so now our number 3. So I'll start. My number 3, Frank Miller again. Daredevil 181, The Death of Elektra. The iconic moment for me from this classic is the actual combat sequence between Bullseye and Elektra, which of course culminates in her death in Matt Murdock's arms. Ian, your number 3?
Somehow I knew that was going to turn up on yours.
My number 3 would be Watchmen. I did it 35 minutes ago.
Excellent.
Murd?
For me, Batman number 497. Bane breaks the bat.
Nice. Nice.
Okay, so I've talked about this issue many times in the air over the years. There are Daredevil spotlights back in, I think it was 2014, maybe 13, 14. We talked about this issue with Kevin Moyer was on, as a big Daredevil fan. And this is one of those books that when I think about comic books that were benchmarks and sort of my life as a reader and affected my sensibilities, this is one of those issues. And the sequence I'm referring to, which I'm sure many listeners are familiar with, it's when Bullseye has been hired by the Kingpin, or he's actually trying to prove himself to the Kingpin by taking on the assassin who took his place, which is Elektra. And the sequence is Bullseye ambushing Elektra in a parking garage where she's decided not to murder Foggy Nelson, who she was assigned to kill. And it's Miller and Klaus Janson, and there's very little dialogue or captions taking you through these two, martial arts masters of all these different forms trying to kill each other in this parking garage. And I was, when I read this story, I read it maybe a year or two after it actually came out. I got it as a back issue. And so maybe I was 12 or 13 again. And I'd never seen violence portrayed that way in a comic book before. What I mean by that is it seemed like, now I don't know much about martial arts, and especially knew nothing when I was a kid, but it seemed like Miller had studied and Jansen studied different forms and sort of moves and techniques. And the way they portrayed this scene, you could follow, again, it's masterful sequential storytelling, the battle between these two lethal combatants. And, it culminates, and Elektra, for other reasons, is also sort of not in top form. If you haven't read the book or read it, it's a masterpiece, but that whole run of Daredevil is a classic. But ultimately, Bullseye gets the best of her with the infamous line, "And now for my next trick," and then runs her through with her own sai, her martial arts knife. And then she crawls, her guts bleeding out of her, basically, to Murdock's brownstone and dies in his arms on his doorstep. I'm a young kid. I was like, just my mouth was agape, my eyes agog. I'm like, I'd never seen anything like this in a comic book before. And I was reading, all the Marvel heroes and G.I. Joe and even Sergeant Rock, but nothing like this. And the death felt so powerful and so meaningful, and just. I went back and got every Frank Miller Daredevil book I could get my hands on, because that was the end of his first original classic arc. But for me, that's kind of like when you watch me The Godfather or Bonnie and Clyde, when you see violence in a movie that had really been portrayed that way before. For me, that was just a new level, but not gratuitously, it served the story. But it was a new level for how violence could be portrayed in a comic book in a way that was so in service to the story.
Yeah.
That's my number 3.
It's a very cinematic moment, and one of the things that Frank Miller does best is definitely capping his his moments as cinematic, like making them stick in your brain as something that you go back to. And that particular instance of the sigh going through her has been remade so many times in so many different moments, whether it be in Daredevil comics themselves to try and mimic it, or to go back to it in flashback, or whether it be the not so very successful Daredevil movie where they attempted to do something similar, or whether it be in the Daredevil television show where it's been referenced. It's just one of those iconic. I mean, obviously that's what we're doing right here, but it's one of those moments that just sticks with you, and you are not surprised when it's repeated as often as it is, because it's just that powerful.
And we should mention also, to go back to which I thought was great, Ian, that you kept referencing the term cinematic, because Miller's a big fan of like film noir, for example, and that's all over a lot of his work. I mean, Sin City, for Pete's sake. So, well put. Murr, what are your thoughts on that moment?
Well, Chris, I actually didn't read that Miller run on Daredevil until just a couple of years ago, when we were preparing for a book of the month or something for CGS. I was familiar with the outcome of that sequence, though. The upshot being the death of Elektra. I'd read about that here and there, and I will say the first time I saw the image of the moment of her actual death, her impalement on her own thigh, I saw it. It was about, say, 15 feet tall, projected onto a wall or a screen as part of a final exam I was taking in a course on popular culture as an undergrad at Penn State. This was part of a question on the final exam. So that's
Wow.
An indicator of its significance and its iconism. I'm not sure what is.
I wish I could have been taking classes like that when I was in college, Murd.
Yeah, I never got a class like that either.
It's one of the things that inspired me to go on and get a whole darn degree in the same subject.
Yes, indeed. Well, one thing that I did have when I was in college was my film. I took a film class, and my film professor said that if you were to ask me what my favorite movie of all time is, and this is a film professor, and we're watching the classics. And she says one of the most classic movies and one of her favorite movies is South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut.
I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
All right, Ian, you're number 3, my friend.
So it had to be on my list somewhere, and I felt like putting it as number 1 would be too easy. So I just went ahead and stuck it in here at number 3. Watchmen. I mean, we all know Watchmen. It's to some people, Alan Moore's pinnacle work. Others would disagree. But for me, it's also on that list of comic books that I did not quite get when I read it the first time. I needed to reread it, and I'm so glad that I did, because at a later age, I appreciated it so much more. And even when I read it the first time, this was the moment that stuck with me. It's near the very end of the comic book. It's in the final issue. As your heroes are doing the famous stare down moment. You've got Night Owl and you've got Rorschach and the rest all just there confronting the villain. And what happens in superhero comics? They confront the villain. The villain goes and tells you exactly what they did, and they're stopped. Ozymandias makes very clear that this is not your typical comic book, and it's in a world where comic books exist. It's in a world where Superman and Batman exist in the serials, and the words that he uses specifically, Dan, I'm not a Republic serial villain. Do you seriously think I'd explain my master stroke if there remained the slightest chance of you affecting the outcome? I did it 35 minutes ago. That is pinnacle villain right there. Pinnacle villain. Yep. You don't have he's not a James Bond villain. He's not going to stand there and tell you exactly which screw he used to put the laser onto the Empire State Building to destroy parts of 34th Street just because he's having a bad day. This is Ozymandias. He's been planning this for years, and the plan is in motion, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it was that moment that cemented it in my brain that this is something different, and that this is not a book with a happy ending, and it most certainly is not.
And I salute you for noting how important it is to reread Watchmen.
Yes.
Because probably like you, I read it when I was pretty young the first time. And as I was really getting into comics in the 80s, you heard all about Watchmen. So I read it. I mean, I didn't fully understand it. And I've read it several times since then. I want to read it several more times, before my time on this earth comes to an end, because that's a classic where, in every sense of the word, that you keep going back to it. There's something new to be learned from it every single time. And is HBO doing Watchmen now as a series?
They are.
Hear that?
They are actually, and it's being done by Damon Lindelof as well.
From Lost.
Yes,
right?
from Lost, and more importantly, The Leftovers, which is a show, Chris, that I highly recommend you watch because it seems like it would be right up your alley.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the premise. It does sound like it'd be up my alley.
Yeah. And if he seems like the right person to be doing this based on The Leftovers. It's the right type of serial show for Damon, and one that he can definitely play with, because one thing they specifically said is that this is not going to be a straight adaptation of Watchmen, and I think I prefer that, because quite frankly, we've seen the straight adaptation, and like it or not, it exists. I don't want to see it happen again only over 12 episodes of a TV show. I want something a little different.
Any thoughts on Watchmen?
Well, I would like to applaud Ian for injecting some Watchmen into these proceedings. I couldn't bring myself to put any Watchmen on my list because I didn't know which one to choose. I mean, it seems to me that Watchmen iconic Watchmen moments could be an episode unto itself. It's for the same reason I actually didn't put any Crisis on Infinite Earths moments on my top 5 list, because I know quite a few moments in Crisis that I think are densely iconic, and how do you choose between them? But I will say the one Watchmen moment that I couldn't resist putting on my alternates list is precisely the one that Ian has just chosen as his number 3. Because, for the reasons stated, I mean, it is blowing a huge hole in the generic conventions of superhero storytelling, and it's just creating this really powerful holy shit moment in the mind of the reader. Oh no, the world is going to come to an end. He's actually going to murder millions of people, and there's nothing the good guys can do to stop it. And indeed, the first things you see in the next issue, number 12, are just these very weighty, horrifying, like charnel house, completely silent pages full of piles and piles of dead people in New York City with a giant cosmic space squid on top of them. All because Ozymandias was able to launch his master stroke 35 minutes before he bothered to tell the heroes about it. So, yeah, it's a tremendous cliffhanger moment.
All right, brother, you're number 3.
Yes, for me, yes, this is from the Batman number 497, near the conclusion of the Nightfall story arc. That was such a big deal for Batman comics in the early 90s. It's sort of the culmination of the villain Bane's master plan, which was to release all of Batman's rogues gallery from prison and from Arkham Asylum and force the Bat to work overtime to track them all down. And then once Batman is physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausted, depleted, at his lowest ebb, he drags himself back to the Batcave, and there is Bane waiting for him, wearing his trademark mask and juiced up with the super drug Venom, prepared to hand Batman an epic beating. And that's exactly what does happen. And at the end of it all, once Bane has proven himself Batman's physical superior in this severely depleted state, it must be added, he then picks up Batman and just literally snaps his spine, breaks him like a cord of firewood over his knee. And it was depicted on the front cover, and it was plastered all over the interiors, and it's just, for those of us who were young and reading comics at the time, it was monolithic in the impact it had on us. That such a thing could happen to Batman. I mean, not just killed outright, because cynicism of even in like young teenagers dictates they'd probably just bring him back. You're not going to have a Batman comic without Batman. But just the way that he was so thoroughly beaten and brutalized, and then humiliated, just to be literally broken in two that way. Something that didn't happen to the post-crisis Dark Knight detective.
Yeah.
But it did in the early 90s that one time. And it's been revisited multiple times since then. And, if we're going to try and be slightly more objective about the iconism of these, if we can come up with, if it's possible to come up with an empirical measurement of any kind of the iconism of the moments we encounter in comics, I think it would probably have something to do with the number of times a particular moment is referenced or reproduced visually in various comics that followed. And by that measure, Batman getting broken by Bane is be one of the most iconic moments of comics in the 90s. That said, and I know if Matt were here, he would back me up on this one. Bane breaking the Bat deserves to be on one of our lists, so here it is on mine.
I'm glad you had it there, Murd, because I feel like my mentioning of Kraven's Last Hunt, breaking the Bat definitely lends itself a lot to Kraven's Last Hunt, just because in Kraven's Last Hunt you're breaking down Spider-Man and you're trying to destroy everything that he is, and that's essentially what Bane was doing here with Batman, on a very different scale, but still similar circumstances.
Superstitious, mentally unhinged opponent attempting to overcome this totemistic figure that's been looming over him for years. In Kraven's case, it's because he and Spider-Man actually had an antagonistic relationship. In Bane's case, it's because he sees this Batman in Gotham City as kind of a human manifestation or incarnation of that spirit that had been tormenting him down in Santa Prisca for years.
Yep.
So, yeah, absolutely. Setting out to defeat Batman is very much similar to what Kraven was trying to do with Spider-Man. Good call.
And for me, I read all those stories many years ago, but when I think of that, I always go back to the film, which I know this isn't some people's favorite, The Dark Knight Rises, because the three Nolan Batman films I basically consider one movie, essentially. And I love the way, some people don't like it, but I love the way Bane was portrayed in that film and how they sort of get a realistic portrayal of that battle, between the two of them when he knocks a vertebrae loose, basically. He doesn't, completely break his spine, but yeah, that's a great pick, Murd. It's a classic image. Let's see. It's Ian's turn. Ian, what's your number 2?
All right. My number 2 is The Rise of Phoenix in X-Men 1, number 101.
Oh.
Wow. I am power and fire incarnate.
Ian, God, I'm
For
glad
me,
you're
it's
here.
it is the revelation at the closing of Thunderbolts number 1 that the Thunderbolts are
Yes.
Murd. Oh, these are gentlemen, too. This is why I want to do this topic. Oh. All right. My number 2, again, probably won't be a surprise to people either know me either personally or at least through what I talk about in the show. It's the death of Gwen Stacy. Specifically when Peter goes to her, I saved you. That's my number 2.
Snap.
Right.
Aw, snap. All right. Yeah, sorry. Had to. I had to pick the Rise of Phoenix just because it's one of the most important moments in X-Men history. Just because as it was happening, I've recently been listening to the podcast Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men, which is a fantastic podcast to listen to if you want to just go through the history of the X-Men.
What's it called again?
Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men.
Okay.
They begin in the Silver Age and they work their way up. And
cool.
And they've been, I think right now they're actually up to, I think, Extinction Agenda or Executioner Song, one or the other. And they,
anyway, go ahead.
Oh, I know. Yeah, please. But they do a better job of breaking down the X-Men arc by arc than anyone else I've seen. They touch on New Mutants, they touch on X Factor, they touch on all the sides they can possibly touch on. And when they did Phoenix, I had an appreciation of the character before then, but it got me to go back and look at the trade paperback that I have for Phoenix. And in that issue itself, anyone who was reading that for the first time as it was happening is thinking, like, oh God, this is going to be the death of a beloved X-Man, because this is still a time where deaths actually happen for real. And that seemed to be what they were going for. You know, like, how is Jean possibly going to get out of this scenario? And, you know, she's trying to save her fellow X-Men by piloting a ship from above the Earth back down, and it crash lands into the bay, and everyone's out but Jean. Like, what happens to Jean? And then we see what happened to Jean. And now and forever, I am Phoenix. And it is a changing moment for Jean, a changing moment for the X-Men themselves, and it then leads to, you know, one of the best story arcs ever, the Dark Phoenix saga. And it's also really the first time I feel like we've had a change in powers for the X-Men. Like, they were all basically, you know, honing their abilities, but very few got increased abilities. And Jean did at first, when at first she just had did she have telekinesis first or telepathy?
Telekinesis.
Telekinesis first.
Yeah.
Got it. And then she wound up with a telepathy. And then this is just a further increase in her abilities to the point where no one is as powerful as Jean. And it started a whole new era of the X-Men for me, which began in Giant Size X-Men, and then I believe essentially culminated with the Dark Phoenix saga. And then we have a second era after that with Kitty.
And Ian, like, I couldn't agree more, because, I mean, I was reading all those stories, again, my formative years, you know, 12, 13, 14 years old. And like, you know, we all think back to when we were teenagers and how everything is so emotionally intensified, right? Every interaction in life, everything you're doing. And the X-Men were so ideally written for people of that age, but it also still works with the best stories, not, you know, Executioner Song or Extinction Agenda, but the best stories still have that power, and that both as for an adult, but they also bring you back to the way you felt when you read them then. But I think it hit on a great point, which is that before they brought in the Phoenix is a cosmic force and it wasn't really Jean and blah, 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 because they weren't considering that. Claremont clearly intended for this arc to end with her dying as a result of she can no longer contain her power. And what's so powerful about that is, and you hit the nail on the head, she is like the culmination of her mutation. And Xavier and Maura McTaggart are like terrified of this. Like, they're studying her. Like, they see, like, okay, this is her mutation taken to the cosmic level that no one really can control. And, you know, at one point in Dark Phoenix, Claremont compares her using her power to like being a drug addict, like euphoric on the high. And Ian, man, ladies and gentlemen, this is Ian Levenstein unleashed on CGS. Outstanding.
Like the Phoenix.
Great pick, man. Great pick.
Yes, fantastic.
Thank you.
Hi, Mer, go ahead.
All right. So to set the stage, it's the mid-'90s, 1996 or 97 or so. The Marvel Universe has been rocked by the Onslaught event, when a whole bunch of their long-standing superheroes had to throw themselves into a rift in reality to defeat the Onslaught entity, and they had apparently blinked out of existence, when in reality they actually had just been given into the hands of Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee. But that's another story. Anyway, the Marvel Universe had kind of a major heroic void to be filled temporarily for the 12-month duration of that contract that Liefeld and Lee had to do their little Heroes Reborn project. So Kurt Busiek steps forward, writer Kurt Busiek, with a new superhero team concept he calls the Thunderbolts. And it's a bunch of fairly unexceptional-looking, all-new, or so it appears, superhero characters. He gives a few interviews in the fan press, you know, telling a little bit about the characters and mentioning sort of offhandedly that there is a kind of a twist that can be expected, but nothing too specific. And somehow, even in those early burgeoning days of the fan press, and the internet was present, rumors were still being spread that way, but not in quite the pandemic way that they tend to these days, where word just spreads like wildfire, and it's almost impossible for publishers to keep anything a secret. But the exact nature of that twist that Busiek hinted at was actually kept under wraps until Thunderbolts #1 was released in early 1997. And we discover that this unassuming new team of superheroes that have stepped forward to volunteer their services to a hero-deprived world after the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, etc. have vanished, They're actually a selection of members of Baron Zemo's Masters of Evil, a team of villainous counterparts to the Avengers, who have adopted the guises of superheroes to earn the world's trust, maybe gain all those juicy security clearances that the Avengers enjoyed before they disappeared, and then make use of all those powers to turn on the world and accomplish whatever villainy they had in mind. They never really got that far as to what they were going to do once they got those clearances. But yeah, for about the first year of that title, this juicy secret that was revealed on the last page, shocker, of the first issue was kept a secret. Things were complicated by a fresh-faced young hero named Jolt being added to the roster so that the Thunderbolts, the Masters of Evil masquerading as the Thunderbolts, had to keep their secret not only from the world at large, but from one of their own members. And then by the end of that first year's arc, the secret was revealed, and most of the members of the Thunderbolts decided that they'd grown used enough to the adulation they received as heroes to rethink their former roles as villains and give a go to being superheroes in actuality. So from that point on, the suspense of, oh, geez, how long can they keep up this masquerade is kind of shot. But then a different kind of suspense takes its place, and the series, which ran for a good long time after that first year's arc, then became more about their quest, the remaining Thunderbolts' quest for redemption. Can supervillains really make good as superheroes? But just that revelation of the actual nature of this fairly generic team of superhero villain. This is how the dividing line between hero and villain is blurred, ladies and gentlemen. It's a morally gray world after all. So superheroes, this team of fairly generic superheroes turned out to be pre-existing supervillain characters, and the mere fact that they were able to keep that a secret for as long as they did, it still boggles my mind to this day, and it definitely it sealed my participation as a reader with this title from then on, because I love stories where villains are the protagonists, and I didn't even know going in that that's what I was getting when I tried this new series. I was buying it solely on the strength of Music's reputation. And yeah, it's still one of the best surprises I've received as a comics reader in all my quarter century of reading comics. So, yeah, that definitely needed to be in my top five.
Great pick. And I remember reading that for the first time, and like you, I was floored by that revelation. And again, I already loved Kurt Busiek's work. I knew him. I think Marvel's had already come out. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I was already in awe of him as a writer, and I got to say, I don't think he's ever disappointed me as a writer on everything he's done that I've read. And the Thunderbolts, and Murray made a great point about how they're seeking redemption. That's when they bring Hawkeye into the storyline, and he takes on the appropriate role as their team leader after Zemo vamooses. So that's a great series. It's pretty much consistently great until they kind of went off the rails and they tried to do something different with it down the road. But what are your thoughts on that, Ian?
Well, I mean, Thunderbolts is one of my favorite series and has been for quite some time. I kind of love that yet again, Murd and I are sort of piggybacking just because I found out through an interview with Kurt Busiek that he's one of the reasons why Jean Grey came back. It wasn't even intentional. But he, even before he was a writer for Marvel Comics, and he was just working as I think either a stock boy or an intern, I forget which, he accidentally wound up saying to an editor, like, oh yeah, no, this is how you bring Jean back. And they wound up using it in the comics. And that's...
I never knew that.
Yeah, it's another part of the Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men podcast. If you listen to their Kurt Busiek interview, he goes further into it. But no, Busiek's run on Thunderbolts is bar none one of my favorites, and that reveal at the end of the issue, I'd say the only thing that has shocked me more, probably since that's even happened, is the ending to the movie Split by M. Night Shyamalan, which I will not give away for anybody who hasn't been paying attention.
I haven't seen that yet.
If you don't know what happens, then I will not give it away. All I will say is that if you're a fan of previous M. Night Shyamalan movies, you're definitely going to love the ending to Split.
I'm a fan of certain M. Night Shyamalan movies, the movies where he's not totally besotted with himself, and when he doesn't refer to himself as like a writer whose work will change the world.
It's an unexpected shift that aligns itself with other properties. That's all I'm going to say.
That I'd heard about. I'm definitely going to watch that. Appreciate that tip.
Yeah, but that's the only thing that surprised me more than Thunderbolts.
I definitely want to see the film now. Okay. My number 2, I'm not going to go on too much length because we talked about this sequence so many times on the show, but hell, it's that important. It's the death of Gwen Stacy. Issues 121, 122 of Amazing Spider-Man. Jerry Conway writing, art by Gil Kane and John Romita Sr. All those names you should be palpitating. I just referred to the moment where Gwen has been flung off the bridge. The Goblin knocks her off with the wing of his glider, and Spidey shoots down his web and catches her on the leg, and you see that snap sound effect near her neck. And Peter is unaware he's pulling her up. He's making light of it. I'm not only the most dashing hero on 2 legs. He's the most versatile. I'm reading from the dialogue here. And then he goes, Gwen? Hey, kid, what's wrong? Don't you understand? I saved you. You can't be. Oh, no, don't be dead, Gwen. I don't want you to be dead. I saved you, honey. Don't you see? And then smaller words. I saved you. Comics change right there. And for many people, this is the beginning of the Bronze Age. Because she's dead. And she's dead because he tried to save her. She was going to die regardless. But I don't know if it's Conway or the letter, whoever decided to put that snap in there. Talk about decisive, lettering / sound effects. Peter inadvertently, Norman Osborn ultimately killed her, but Peter inadvertently is the literal cause of her death because the shock of the webbing stopping her fall snaps her neck. And, clone aside all that, she doesn't come back. She's dead. This has been Spider-Man's girlfriend since, fairly early in the Silver Age. And everyone thought, they're going to get married. Will they ever tell her identity? He agonized about that. So, her father already died. And she's gone. And she dies in his arms. He can't save her. And you think about how this was captured so beautifully in Marvels where, he tells the police officers who are responding to the scene, Spider-Man killed her because he's out beside himself with grief. The crowd, the press converges, want anybody to touch her body. It's powerful stuff for 1973 superhero comics. And this is why Jerry Conway is such an important writer, period, but especially when it comes to Spider-Man, because he takes the character to a new level here. And if you read Spider-Man from then on through to today, this moment resonates throughout Peter Parker's life. Where some of the things you kind of they're cast off, who cares anymore, you forget about it. When it comes to the core of the Spider-Man myth, this is there. Now, they totally blew it in the Amazing Spider-Man films. They wasted this terribly. This films that were done with Andrew Garfield. But if they ever returned, I don't know if they're going to return to Gwen with the new Spider-Man movies. It doesn't look like they're going to, but if they do, I hope they get it right because, wow, this matters. That's what I'll end with when it comes to my selection is this matters.
Yeah, and it was Marvel setting the bar, too, because at the time, DC didn't do stuff like this. And frankly, comics didn't do stuff like this. They didn't make such significant changes to the roster or the love interests outside of maybe breakups. There really weren't a lot of deaths going on. And it's one of the things that grounded Spider-Man so well, and Marvel Comics at the time so well, is that they were willing to admit that life ends. They weren't afraid to tell those stories. And it was very revolutionary for the time and certainly changed the way comics were written thereafter.
Well put, my friend. Well put. Murray, I know you got to go, so do you want to just shout out and explain your number 1?
I'll be happy. Well, let's all shout them out. I'll explain mine, and then I'll excuse myself. Okay. Now, my number 1 is one that I know is not going to appear on anybody else's lists. It's extremely subjective, but it's from Infinity War, the original from 1992, kids, except no substitutes. Number 5, The Magus Triumphant.
Wow.
Nice.
All right, my number 1, it's Miller again, and I have to go to my all-time favorite comic book story, which is Daredevil Born Again, which I hope one day we do a whole episode on, if not more. I've talked about this with Peter recently, actually. But it's from the last issue, which is entitled Armageddon. And it's I'll go into more detail when we talk about it, but it's how Miller portrays Captain America in that issue. I think he captures the essence of what Captain America actually is, essentially. And I'll elaborate in a moment.
All right, and my number one, because I'm predictable, the death of Superman.
All right. All right, Mara, go ahead. I know you're going to time limit.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, the Infinity War is it's a sequel to the classic Infinity Gauntlet story, begun by Jim Starlin and George Perez and finished by Jim Starlin and Ron Lim. Infinity War is its 6-issue miniseries follow-up, which was just Starlin and Lim all the way through. And it featured a new player, well, sort of new, but well-known to longtime readers of Starlin's work at Marvel, introduced during his run on Warlock back in the 70s, the Magus, who is... here he's just sort of a shadow, figuratively and Jungianly, you might say, of the Adam Warlock character. He had been like an evil alternate future self of Warlock, whose timeline was erased due to Warlock's own efforts during that 70s run I mentioned of Starlin's. But here we find that the Magus is actually the dark side of Adam Warlock's personality, expunged from Adam Warlock's character by Warlock himself during the brief time he held the Infinity Gauntlet at the close of the Infinity Gauntlet miniseries. He thought he couldn't be a fit deity for the Marvel Universe if he had good and evil in him, so he expunged them both. But unfortunately, the evil side manifested itself as a new Magus. Who then immediately began his machinations to acquire the Infinity Gems for his own use and become the new god figure of the Marvel Universe. So the entire Infinity War series, everything that happened in it was all just a series of feints and schemes that the Magus had put together, culminating in his gaining the gems and also finding a way around the cosmic injunction put in place by the Living Tribunal that prevented the gems from working in tandem, thus creating the Infinity Gauntlet and allowing anyone holding it to become the ultimate power of the Marvel Universe. So for a couple of pages before the page that I consider my number one iconic moment in comics, there are deliberations among the Court of Cosmic Entities, also seen in the Infinity Gauntlet, in which cases are being made to cause the gems to work in tandem in the hopes of using them against the Magus. Little did the parties who are arguing in favor of this know the Magus already had the gems in his possession. All he needed is the word of the Living Tribunal to make them work together. And the Living Tribunal, meanwhile, defers to eternity, the living embodiment of the spirit of the Marvel Universe, created by Steve Ditko. Eternity has been semi-comatose for most of the Infinity War story. That's the level of power that the Magus already wields, even before he gets those Infinity Gems to work together again. The Living Tribunal is able to get through to Eternity and put the question to him, will he give his consent to allow the Infinity Gems to work together so that they can be used as a weapon against the Magus? And in Eternity manages to mouth one at a time the words, "Let the gems work as one." And then just a page or so later, we get this full-page splash of the Magus wearing the Infinity Gauntlet, blazing with power. He's holding it aloft, looking up at it with this beautiful maniacal grin on his face as his would-be assassin and usurper, Dr. Doom, staggers in the background, thrown back by this influx of peerless, non-parallel cosmic power that the Magus now possesses. And this is a guy who already had a spaceship in headquarters powered by like a dozen different cosmic cubes, or cosmic polygons, I should say, of cosmic realities. Now he's got the Infinity Gauntlet on top of it. This is supposed to be like the all is lost moment for this miniseries, because the bad guy has got his hands on the ultimate power. But to me, reading this as a total neophyte to comics in 1992, because, as I've said many times in this podcast, it was the Infinity War miniseries and its attendant crossovers that got me interested in comics. That plus the efforts of our friend Matt, of course. But this one page stood out to me as found it somewhat inspiring. You know what I mean? The Magus was clearly like the personification of evil. He's the dark side of this perfect being that is Adam Warlock, so he must be perfectly evil. And his actions have proved several times over the course of this miniseries to that point how evil he was. And yet, I mean, he was this he's just like a fragment of a single living soul that isn't even supposed to exist. He'd been wiped out from reality by Warlock back in the 70s, but yet somehow he managed to claw himself back from oblivion and make himself the supreme being of all reality. And that crazy grin on his face and the posture of his body as drawn by Ron Lim as he lifted that gauntlet aloft, it made me feel like any little schmuck, even someone like myself, could someday achieve ultimate power. To a little megalomaniacal 13-year-old. I mean, there was something to that image that stuck with me. I was competing in spelling bees at that point, and I just sort of imagined if I ever went all the way and won the national spelling bee in Washington, D.C., that was the pose I would strike up there on that stage in front of the world. As I pretended I was wearing my own little orthography gauntlet up there on stage. Chris, you mentioned earlier how that page from Black Panther number 29, was it?
27.
27, my apologies. But of the Black Panther and Storm and Monica Lynn, that's your Grail page. That is one page that you want to own above all others. The only page of original art that I've ever really seriously wanted to own is that page from Infinity War number 5. It's probably out there somewhere and probably not that expensive. If I ever come across it, I will shell out hundreds of dollars for it if I find it. But
right.
That page, since it is, as you in your terms, Chris, my Grail page, it had to be my number one. Regardless of its relative lack of historical importance, who gives a crap? It was important to me in 1993.
That's what matters.
Insert joke about spoilers for Avengers 4 here.
Oh, Ian, I only wish that the Magus' involvement could be spoiled, but I'm pretty sure we're a few films away from the Magus showing up anywhere in the MCU.
Yeah.
If only. All right, and on that note, gentlemen, I'm afraid I must skedaddle here. My father's waiting on me to provide him some transportation.
Understood, brother, understood. Glad we got your number one in.
Yeah, I'm glad I was able to participate in this. It was just a rollicking good time.
Good to talk to you, Murd.
Talk to you soon.
All right, gentlemen, good night, good luck.
Good night, my friend. Take care.
Take it easy.
All right, Ian, go ahead on your number one.
All right, so, I went with the death of Superman. Because iconic moments don't have to necessarily be good. The death of Superman at the time was jarring. No one expected the icon of the DC universe to be killed. This was the first superhero. This was the one that started it all. Siegel and Schuster's magical entity of a Gollum-type character that was going to wind up, saving the world and making it a better place. And that's exactly what Superman was when he started. And the character changed and evolved throughout the years. Sometimes became a bit campy. Was known as the Big Blue Boy Scout, essentially, just because he, didn't really have much darkness to him. He was super light for many, many years, and it felt like his sales were dropping, and DC was like, we need to do something. So, hey, why don't we kill him? And that's what they did in 1993. And it's a series that, when I was first getting into comics, got me into comics. I remember reading Uncanny X-Men first, and I then remember, going back and reading Death of Superman issues just because it was all anybody was talking about. It was all over the news. It was in newspapers. It was on the lips of television anchors over and over again. Freaking late night shows were talking about it. And it got comic books back into the... I guess into the main scope of society after years of sort of not being there.
Yeah, good point.
And with this culmination, with this final scene, which was beautifully drafted, you see Superman take that final punch at Doomsday, and he succeeds while at the same time falling. And there's Lois cradling his body as Jimmy is to the side taking a photo, and it's an incredibly iconic image. It's one that's been seen throughout the world. There have been murals made out of this there's been pop art made out of this. It's been almost as popular oppose to copy as Supergirl dying in Crisis on Infinite Earths. You know, it's one of those ones that you just see everywhere. And most recently, I don't know if you had a chance to watch it yet, but the Death of Superman movie.
Shane told me it was very well done.
It's incredibly well done, and they get the spirit of the story down.
And this is the second one, not the first movie, correct?
Yes, the first movie is a pile of trash. Don't bother.
That's what I heard.
Yeah, the first one was the first of these animated movies long enough ago where I watched it at San Diego Comic-Con, and I haven't been to San Diego Comic-Con since 2009. So that's how old that one is. This one's brand spanking new, and the second is actually going to be Reign of the Supermen with Superboy, Steel, Cyborg Superman, and the Eradicator all out there, which I'm amazed that I never thought I'd see the day when I'd see an animated Eradicator. You know?
Well, I've had two testimonials now where I got to go out and get that movie because I'd always heard the first version was very poorly done.
And it is, yeah.
But I'm thrilled. I'm looking forward to watching this.
Oh, funny enough, Jerry O'Connell is the voice of Superman.
Terrific!
And his wife Rebecca Romaine is the voice of Lois Lane.
Oh, wow!
Yeah, and it takes a little bit for Jerry to get the voice down, but I think by about a quarter into the movie, he gets things flowing. His Clark is better than his Superman. That much I would definitely say. But you get used to it.
Let me ask this, Ian.
Yeah.
When you read the story now, how does it hold up for you? Just the comic itself.
This particular issue, I feel like, does actually hold up. You know, because this is the one where, you know, everything happens, which I believe is Superman 75, if memory serves.
Yeah.
And that is the one where you feel the emotion being written down on the page. The art itself is beautifully done. That was that Jurgens on art in 75? I believe so. I'm gonna check that for my own notes.
Yeah, I think so. Double check though.
Yeah. But you know, like you feel like you don't feel like you're being had as the issue is going on. You know, even if you know, in today's day and age, you know that eventually Superman was going to come back, and he was going to come back with a mullet. You know, with this here, they definitely. They gave you enough to feel like you were getting your money's worth. It was Dan Jurgens with Brett Breeding assisting on inking, and I believe he drew over Jurgens at times as well.
And from a commercial standpoint, it's interesting because I wasn't a retail yet. I'm still a few years away from that, but I remember how did it sell like 1 million copies or something like that?
Yes, and the freaking polybag too.
Yeah. So remember, we're also neck deep in the speculative era, right? So. This is probably one of the major catalysts for it, I would imagine. So it's just interesting from a commercial standpoint, the sort of, let's call it the major sort of, I'll be oxymoronic here, the major blip impact this had, because when the hell in recent history was anybody selling 1 million copies of a comic book, right?
Oh, please. Yeah.
Now, of course, that means that retailers ordered that many, but you know, like you said, it was multimedia. People were talking about it. That was like this moment where, like, wow, a comic book really mattered in terms of the larger popular culture. This is long before, you know, the wave of movies or anything like that to the degree we're accustomed to today.
Sure.
I mean, today a comic, if they can push through to retailers 100,000 copies of a comic, that's amazing.
It's true. But this was the, you know, at the time. And that's why I say, like, you know, not everything has to be good about an iconic moment. You know, when this issue came out, it was, you know, it was popular, it sold, everything was great, but this was essentially the highest point of the speculative era.
Yeah.
You know, with the polybag and the armbands and the you know, the funeral in real life, like all of this being done, all this pomp and circumstance for an issue when. How were you going to top that? And the answer is you weren't. And that all those people who may have picked up the Death of Superman certainly did not pick up past maybe halfway through Reign. I mean, even though I love Reign of Superman, but Funeral for a Friend was a nice capper, but like it was kind of dull, all things considered. And you know, it really there was very little to keep you reading comic books after that. As somebody who may have just been jumping in.
Let me ask this question. Do you think all things considered that had a greater impact than the New 52?
Yeah, see, that's a very good question. I think that at the time, this definitely got more people interested than the New 52 did, because, I mean, as we saw, as people who were reading it, New 52 dropped off very quickly. It was, it was all over the news, but people stopped caring after the first issue. You didn't hear newspapers saying like, "Hey, issue 3 of Superman came out," like whatever. With this though, it was still in the public zeitgeist way, way more after the fact than the New 52 was, and it's funny. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned New 52 because it's that version of Superman and that version of the Justice League that's in the animated movie. So you're going to see a pop collar Superman.
Okay, I'm looking forward. I'm going to get it as soon as possible. Look forward to watching it.
Just because it's all part of the animated movie universe that they created, and they've basically been building an ongoing cast ever since. Whatever that first arc of New 52 was, that's where the Justice League Darkseid movie started. So yeah, had to be said because it is very much a moment that changed comic books for good or ill.
All right, my number one again. This is Daredevil Born Again, and I've talked for years how we really want to get on the air and do, if not a footnote, then a really in-depth review of this story. And Peter and I just spoke briefly recently about it. We're going to do this eventually, ladies and gentlemen. We just got to find enough people in the time, which is harder and harder these days, to get enough of a quorum together to discuss it. For me, this is tough to pick through because for me, there's so many iconic moments in this entire story. And for those that don't know, just the premise, I don't want to spoil it, just the Kingpin discovers Daredevil's identity. Let me just go with that. That's the crux of it, and all that, the consequences of that. And David Mazzucchelli is one of my all-time favorite artists. And this is Miller returning to Daredevil after leaving the book after his initial classic run in the late 70s and early 80s. And for me, this is the greatest writing of Frank Miller's career. It's the classic deconstruction of a hero and how the hero then has to sort of build himself back up. But the way it's done, the crime noirish narrative, again, I'll save that for another episode. But the iconic moment for me is in the last couple issues, specifically the last issue entitled Armageddon. I forgot the exact issue number, forgive me, but it's in the Born Again, story arc, where Captain America arrives on the scene because a government agent named Nuke, who people may know from how he was used in the Jessica Jones Netflix series, is wreaking havoc. He's being retained by the Kingpin. And by the way, this story is the most terrifying rendition of the Kingpin ever captured, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the way they keep bringing his character.
It's high up there, definitely.
Yeah. And Nuke wears an American flag tattooed to his face. And we find out he's empowered by sort of like a bastardized version of the super soldier serum. And Captain America is horrified by this, and he confronts Matt Murdock, and he says to him, and this is my iconic moment, these 2 pages, he goes, he wears the flag, and Matt says, "I hadn't noticed." And then this is Captain America thinking, he goes, "It doesn't mean anything to them," thinks the soldier. "To them, it's just a piece of cloth. Sometimes I feel so weak." Next page, he goes to confront a corrupt general who's on the Kingpin's payroll. He demands to know who Nuke is. The general's saying, the department holds you in the highest regard. We've always valued your commitment, your loyalty. And Steve just grabs the flag and he goes, "I'm loyal to nothing, General, except the dream." And when I read that as a kid, I'd always loved Captain America, but now I understood Captain America. Because sometimes you get it's like the flag waving, like always like the Marvel equivalent of Superman, not even close. And I think what Miller does, and there's other moments in the story I'm not just covering that are continuing those issues, but where Steve Rogers in those panels, Miller presents with you Steve Rogers is the ideal American soldier. And what does an American soldier swear an oath to defend? Not the U.S. government, not the President of the United States, to uphold and defend the Constitution. And when Steve said, "I'm loyal to nothing except the dream," and the subsequent writers, especially Ed Brubaker, have really taken this concept, is that he's not the guy who's going to be sent in to commit an atrocity in a village because, the CIA told him to, right? He is someone who represents what is the ideal of America? What is what are those words the Declaration of Independence really supposed to represent? You know, what does it mean to be American at its highest aspiration? And Miller, I think, just captures it in a way, at least in my, again, I was very young when I read this, again, 12 or 13, that I'd never seen before when it came to what is Captain America supposed to represent. And those scenes still give me chills to this day, because for Miller, the character is, he's not a lackey, he's not a minion, he's not a toady of policy. He's above all that. That uniform, that flag, that shield means more. It's not cathered to a Republican or a Democratic administration or a particular, you know, policy or agenda. And it's for me, that's as iconic as it gets. Captain America holding that flag and saying, loyal. I'm not basically saying I'm not loyal to you and whatever your politics. I'm loyal to the dream.
It's fascinating to me that two of the moments that you mentioned on this top 5 list are Frank Miller moments involving the most iconic character of that particular comic book publisher. And they're not, and they're also not necessarily the star of that comic.
You know, I didn't even think about that, but you know, you're right on the money, and that just goes to my love of history and my immersion in politics and symbolism and all of that. And you know, I'm for my little shot. I'm working on my own history podcast, ladies and gentlemen. We're getting there. That'll premiere probably not this year, but you know, it's coming up.
Yeah, so. But that's a great moment, and the character of Nuke 2 was kind of fascinating to me, just because of he's very much a character of that era.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Huh.
I mean,
oh man,
you can't get more, you know, like, you know, Vietnam than Nuke. I mean, that's
it's 1980, so they have, you know, they don't say, but it's clearly in places like Nicaragua,
sure.
Places like that. We had all these proxy Cold War conflicts going on. Again, and you know, I'd love for you to join us. We're going to do a Born Again episode.
Great.
Peter and I really wanted to do that for years now. So
yeah.
Hopefully we'll get there. All right, buddy, you want to just quickly shout out lightning round of some of your ultimates?
Sure. You
don't have to go in depth, just kind of say what they are.
Yeah. Well, one of them is Omni-Man's initial turn in Invincible, because Invincible is my comic I love bringing up on these top 5s, so I had to mention that here. I have Tim Drake first putting on the Robin costume. It's one of the few times that a Robin put on the Robin costume not out of his own conflict. You know, not because somebody died. He put on a Robin costume to try and better Batman.
Right, that's right.
That was really, really cool to me. The death of Ultimate Spider-Man was on the list as well, just for the ramifications of that. And I also included on my list the very first word uttered in a Marvel Max title, which was alias number 1. I'll just say it's the F word. Let's put it that way. It was a way to distinguish itself from the other comics in the line, and they certainly went out there and did it almost immediately, to say the least.
One of my favorite finite series. That series.
Yes, and I also include, just for how cool it was when it happened, in Marvel versus DC, and DC, you know, or DC versus Marvel, depending on how you want to put it, the first shot of the amalgam characters. Because I mean, come on,
Good
like
one.
Whoever thought that Marvel and DC characters would be merged and you'd wind up with this joint universe? Like, that was such a weird event that would never happen today. But it was pretty cool when it went down.
That's a good one, man.
Yep. And those are the ones that come to my top of the head. If I think of anything else when you're done with yours, I'll give you more.
All right, my shout out, just again quick. In Batman Year One, again, a lot of Frank Miller here, ladies and gentlemen, because he was really my formative writer when I was growing up. When Batman introduces himself to all the corrupt sort of power lords of Gotham, he throws a smoke bomb at this dinner party, and he comes into the room in the shadows, the cape unfolds, and he just goes, "Ladies, gentlemen, you have eaten well." And he says something like, you know, you feasted, and he says, you know, none of you were safe. And he brings the pot top of the pot onto the flame, and then it goes darkness. Like Batman right there. Like that's the essence of just the Batman, how terrifying he is in the eyes of the superstitious, cowardly criminal lot, so to speak.
Yeah.
Another Batman moment, again in Dark Knight Returns, when Batman and Carrie was the name of the female Robin, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. They come upon the carnivore. The Joker has murdered all the Cub Scouts, and Bruce is narrating. He talks about how he feels Robin's breath intake. She's horrified at what he sees. He just says, "It ends tonight, Joker." And he talks about how there's nothing I can't fix you with my hands, and you're like, "Oh wow, he's really going to kill him now, finally." I can hear Deemer saying, "He should have killed him years ago." But anyway, that's a moment that gives me chills. The final battle between Thanos and Captain Marvel in Marvel's sort of head as he's dying in the death of Captain Marvel, that's a masterpiece. In Fantastic Four 67, like volume 2 or 3, whatever it is, when the late great Mike Wieringo and the Mark Waid team, when Doctor Doom rips off Valeria's skin, his great love, so he can make a deal with the demons to gain more sorceress power. That just shows you how twisted and vicious Doom really is. That's from the classic Unthinkable storyline. Of course, Spider-Man 33, when the Ditko era, when Spidey's lifting the machinery off him, that classic sequence when we got to save Aunt May, and Dr. Ock has put him under all this metal debris and so forth. They kind of aped that in the Spider-Man film they just did a few years ago. X-Men 133, when you see Wolverine cut loose against the Hellfire Club guards, and you listen to the ferocity of Wolverine when he's taking on a multitude of opponents who are not superpowered and how they had no chance whatsoever. And, it's pretty violent for a comic of that time period. And you really realize, wow, like when Wolverine cuts loose, like there's no prisoners, basically. And then, of course, in X-Men 137, the fate of the Phoenix, that final battle in the ruins of the blue area of the moon where, G and Scott profess to love to each other, and then, she takes her own life. That story, even despite all that happened afterward, that story, that moment still floors me emotionally. Like that's, again, you're reading it the first time, you're virtually in tears. I mean, it's you live with those characters each moment through all those issues, and then she dies in that fashion. Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Those are some quick alternates.
I thought of a few others. Well, there was one on my list that I didn't mention. And since you mentioned Batman, I might as well mention it. The final reveal of Jason Todd as the Red Hood.
Ooh, good one.
Excellent Judd Winnick written art in general.
Yep.
It's good stuff. In All-Star Superman, when Superman saves that girl on the ledge from jumping.
Oh yeah.
It's pinnacle Superman. You can't get better than that. And I'll also add on there the Fade to White, which then led into the Age of Apocalypse.
Ooh.
Because
Ian.
That was basically Marvel's Crisis on Infinite Earths moment, where you didn't know what was going to happen next, and then next thing you know, it's an entirely different universe.
Age of Apocalypse, that story holds up for me. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it's fantastic. I wish they'd let it lie though. I wish they hadn't kept going back to it. Outside of Exiles, because it was nice to see Blink show up in Exile.
Exiles was great. Yep.
Well, we encourage our listeners to please go on the forums. We'd love to read other people's top fives. I mean, again, like Rich said, tomorrow we're going to think of a whole new list, basically. I think we go over this in our heads, not to mention all the multitude of alternates that we could throw in as well. Ian, thanks for joining us, man. This was a hoot and a half.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure, man. Whenever you need me to step in, I'm glad to do so. And go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and like I said, especially on on what is essentially the 10th anniversary of a super show, it's nice to get back into CGS land.
Thanks, bro, and thanks in advance for the technical help you're going to provide here. It's really appreciated.
My pleasure.
All right, I know we're not in the studio, so I don't have all the usual exit info, so to speak, on hand.
And I'll go ahead and pinch hit here for Mr. Eberly and give you all of the Comic Geek Speak information that I should have stepped in with when we were actually recording. You can visit the guys over at comicgeekspeak.com to check out past episodes. The email address for Comic Geek Speak is comicgeekspeak@gmail.com. If you want to contribute on the forums, you can do so over at thecomicforums.vanillacommunity.com. If you'd like to send a voicemail, you can do so over at 267-702-6642. Stop by the Facebook over at facebook.com/comicgeekspeak. And they're on Twitter as well, at Comic Geek Speak. I'll hand it back over to Chris.
But again, we thank everybody for the donations. They're really appreciated. Big and small. They help us maintain the show and keep it going. So if you want to make a donation of any size, please go to the CGIS website and don't hesitate. You can contact us on email, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Again, on the forums, let us know what you think of this episode or any of our past episodes. And again, we look forward to geeking out with you hopefully in the not too distant future. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
And I do believe we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one
listener at a time. Good night, all.